Welcome, and thank you for tuning in to ESG Talks, a KBRA podcast series focusing on environmental, social, and governance, ESG. This podcast series highlights various ESG hot topics and includes commentary from prominent voices within the ESG community. In this episode of ESG Talks, I interview Dr. Benjamin Cook, a research scientist at the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies in New York, an adjunct research scientist at Columbia University's Earth Institute. Ben's research focuses on drought, hydroclimate, and intersections between the land surface and climate systems. Ben and I chat about his work at NASA and Columbia, his recent research publication on drought in the Western U.S., and what we can expect from the return of El Niño. Hello, this is Emilie Nadler from KBRA's ESG team. Thanks so much, Ben, for joining me today. I'm really just going to jump right into the questions. So you have a very impressive resume as a research scientist at the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies and Columbia's Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory. Your research focuses on drought, hydroclimate, and the intersections between the land surface and climate systems. How did you become interested in these topics?
I think a lot of my interest in these topics really came from basically family trips out west. I grew up in New York, right outside of New York City, and I hadn't really been anywhere outside of the area until middle school when we started taking trips out into Western North America. So Arizona, Colorado, Texas, Nevada. It sort of made me aware of how different places can really be. And, not everywhere kind of looks like New York. And that was the foundation of my interest. And then as I got into grad school and started researching climate change, I got particularly interested in the sorts of topics that were most important in that particular region of the country, which is a region I quite love and I have really fond memories of visiting. So, Western North America, one of the biggest issues that's made a lot of headlines lately is drought, right? It's a water limited region. And when we have these big droughts hit, you can really start to see the impacts across agriculture, ecosystems, people and communities across the area. So what I really wanted to understand was what drives droughts in this region and how might climate change affect drought risk and severity, both now and into the future.
And so can you talk us through your work at NASA? Why is the work that NASA is doing at the Goddard Institute important to understand the increasingly severe effects of climate change?
Yeah, what a lot of people don't realize is that part of NASA's mission, a small but still significant part, is to study our home planet, Earth. And we do that through a variety of things. We do that a lot through satellites, right? NASA is really strongly involved in satellite missions that monitor things happening over land and over the oceans and in the atmosphere. But also here at the Goddard Institute for Space Studies, we also use climate models, which are these large computer simulations of the climate system that allow us to test different hypotheses and try to understand a little bit more about the physics of the climate system and what the climate system might actually look like going forward in the coming decades and centuries. And in particular, here at Goddard, we're really interested in what climate change is going to mean for a variety of things.
Got it. So one of your recent research publications focused on the growing impact of wildfires on the Western U.S. water supply. We saw an early and severe wildfire season in Canada that led to air quality alerts across much of northeastern U.S. And at the time of taping, there are wildfires spreading in Hawaii, Colorado, California, and other U.S. states. As wildfires grow more intense and pervasive, can you talk about the negative impacts wildfires can have on ecological systems?
Yeah, so in many systems, wildfire is just part of the natural dynamics. So Western North America, for example, a lot of the conifer forests there actually can't reproduce, can't regenerate without wildfire. The reason, though, that we're starting to pay a little bit more attention is because many of the fires that we're seeing recently are larger and burning hotter and are more severe than anything, at least in recent experience. Events that might have been a little bit more frequent and moderate in the past, potentially much more damaging. And so that can affect the kind of ability of different ecosystems to kind of stabilize and regenerate. We've done research showing that can have effects on runoff and water supplies and water quality. And one of the biggest impacts that we really see, really one of the biggest negative impacts, particularly for people, is really the air pollution. Right. I mean, starting this year in early June, there was a whole week where here in New York City, we had what was basically the worst air quality in the entire world. And that was because of these massive wildfires in Canada that had transported all that smoke down into the Northeast and Eastern United States. These wildfires can have really big impacts beyond the locality in which they occur, and I think we got a real taste of that this summer.
It's definitely interesting kind of understanding how wildfires play an important role in natural cycles, but then seeing this enhanced trajectory and the impact that climate change is having on it. It's really important to study those impacts. You're also a professor at Columbia University, and you teach a course on Earth climate systems in the Sustainability Management program. Could you tell us a little bit more about this course and why you really believe that an understanding of how Earth systems work is critical for students entering a career in sustainability?
Yeah, so the Sustainability Management Program at Columbia is really designed to train people working in the private sector to start to integrate sustainability ideas into their careers. This is something that's really growing across in many different sectors. And part of the requirement for this, in addition to the kind of what you might call more practical business-oriented classes that the students have to take, is they also have to take some fundamental science classes. And one of the classes that's offered as an option is my class, which is an introduction to how the climate system works. It's an important class, I think, because the class is really designed to make the students much more educated consumers of climate change science and media. And this is really important because our current media structure, there's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of misinformation. It's increasingly important that people are able to have some sort of background or training that allows them to more critically evaluate claims that are being made in the media, whether they're claims about recent extreme climate event or climate solutions or any other related topic.
That leads nicely into the next topic that I wanted to ask you about, which is the expected return of El Niño in the second half of 2023. What really is this weather phenomenon? Why does it happen? And what are the physical and economic implications of El Niño?
Right. So the El Niño Southern Oscillation is what we call a mode of climate variability. It's a natural climate cycle that happens in the tropical Pacific. And basically, it switches back and forth between cold phases, La Niña events, and warm phases, El Niño events. And right now, we're starting to move into what's very likely to be a very strong El Niño. Now, why do we care what happens in the tropical Pacific? Well, what happens in the tropical Pacific starts to propagate throughout the entire climate system. It can affect heat waves and floods and droughts in a variety of regions around the world. And so there's a particular concern that places like Southern Africa, Eastern Australia, elsewhere, when we have an El Niño, we typically have drought events and potentially heat waves. And so we start to expect that these sort of impacts are going to happen during this particular El Niño event. On top of that, during El Niño years, the world globally tends to be a bit warmer. From natural variability from El Niño on top of climate change, then that can mean really big impacts in a variety of different regions.
So the last thing that I want to ask you is, as you've been closely studying the changing climate over the years, is that when it comes to climate mitigation and as we move towards climate tipping points, what keeps you up at night and what gives you the most hope?
It's a little hard to say, but the thing I always try to tell people is that the problem of climate change is a global challenge, but it's not pass fail. Right, with the Paris Agreement, which set these temperature target of 2 degrees of warming, the way people act oftentimes is such that, if we go over that, then it's game over, the world is ending. If we stay below that, then we don't have to worry about anything at all. Neither one of those is true. Fundamentally, what I like to tell people is even if we don't hit these targets, any warming that we avoid is warming that we do not have to adapt to. But we are going to see some more warming. We've already seen significant warming to this point that's already having impacts. And so we're still going to need to adapt and plan for a warmer world. There's still a lot of leeway there for us to kind of chart our own path and really avoid some of the worst case scenarios, but we just need to take climate change seriously as a problem that needs to be addressed.
I think that's a nice positive note to end on. Thank you so much, Ben, for a very interesting discussion. We really appreciate you coming on.
This concludes our episode. Please email esg@kbra.com with any questions or comments. We also encourage you to visit KBRA's ESG website at esg.kbra.com, where you can find ESG research related to the topics discussed in this episode, further details on KBRA's ESG approach, and other ESG-related media items. You can also join our mailing list to access our ESG Weekly Roundup newsletter.